I'm going to go over some basic points in Immanuel Kant's philosophy. One thing to understand about Kant before anything is that he accepts the hyperbolic doubt of René Descartes. The hyperbolic doubt assumes that we cannot trust sense experience. And if we cannot trust sense experience, then we are on a mission to find out how we know things. And this is the mission of Kant. It is the same mission that his predecessors, John Locke, David Hume, and René Descartes had. Another important point is that Kant, as well as John Locke and David Hume, although they accept the hyperbolic doubt of René Descartes, they do not accept René Descartes' proof for the existence of God. Descartes gave a proof for the existence of God in order to show and prove that he can trust his sense experience. But Kant, Locke, and David Hume don't accept this proof, and so they are only left with the hyperbolic doubt that they cannot trust their sense experience. David Hume was an empiricist philosopher who came to some very drastic conclusions. Some of the conclusions that David Hume reaches are very problematic for those who want to do science and do mathematics, and for anybody who claims that they know things or that knowledge is possible. Hume reached the conclusion that we really only know our sense impressions, and sense impressions are based off particular experiences. So all of the universal knowledge that we assume that we know, it's not really known. The only things that are really known are particular sense impressions. Kant notices that in the philosophy of David Hume, you cannot make broad universal statements even about mathematical truths. Immanuel Kant is known for recognizing a particular problem with the philosophy of David Hume. And this problem is often called Hume's fork. It involves the variety of judgments in the mind and the relationship of the subject and the predicate in these propositions that are formed from the judgments. The first type of judgment that Kant notices that is in the philosophy of David Hume, he calls a synthetic judgment. A synthetic judgment is a judgment that gives new information, but it is not universal and necessary. This judgment is based on sense experience, since new information is gathered. If I say the apple is red, this would be a synthetic judgment. This requires experience. There is new information that is given. There is a new cognitive element that is added to the subject of the apple. The apple is red. How do I find out the apple is red? I have to experience this. I wouldn't know the apple is red unless I have the particular experience of viewing a particular apple. Apples don't have to be red. It's not necessary that an apple is red. The universal truth cannot be established that all apples are red based on my particular experience with this apple being red. The next type of judgment that Kant notices that is in the philosophy of David Hume, he labels an analytic judgment. Now, the analytic judgment does not give new information, but it's necessary. It does give universal necessary information. An example would be the circle is round. If we analyze this particular statement, we notice that if we know what a circle is, we already know it's round. So the predicate round is already implied in the subject. So from a mere analysis of this statement, we are able to discover the truth of it. This judgment doesn't require any experience. There's no new information that's being gathered here. All we have to do is analyze the subject in order to know the truth of this judgment. So there's nothing really new being said about the subject, but it is necessary. The circle is round is necessarily true, because all you're really doing, according to Kant, is restating the subject. Kant is looking for a foundation for the validity of mathematical and scientific truths. Kant wants to establish a foundation for scientific pursuits, and that's going to require judgments that are necessary and universal, and they give new information. You can't do science if you're going to give judgments and you're going to make statements that are not necessary and universal. Who would care about conclusions that were not necessary? If you were going to spend years studying some particular science and then you came out with the conclusion, and then you have to tell everybody, well, this conclusion, it's not really necessary. That is not very satisfying to most scientists and to most people who are searching for knowledge. So the judgments, they have to be necessary and universal, and they must give new information. If you are studying a science and making conclusions, but the only conclusions you can give have no new information, then what would be the point? The whole point when you're studying is to find new information, is to gain new knowledge. So Kant claims that there must be some sort of synthetic a priori judgment. Now, a priori just means prior to experience. That is the analytic side of this judgment. Analytic judgments are a priori. They are prior to experience. And a synthetic judgment would be a posteriori, or after experience. So Kant says that we need to find a synthetic a priori judgment. In fact, there must exist a synthetic a priori judgment. Kant's done mathematics before. He has seen in mathematics, when you do 3 plus 3 equals 6, that is a necessary statement. He has made the mathematical judgment of 7 plus 5 equals 12. And when he makes that mathematical judgment, he knows that it's true. He knows that that is universal, necessary information. And Kant claims that judgment is also synthetic, because 7 plus 5 equals 12 relies on sense experience. If we examine the subject of 7 plus 5, we notice that 12, the predicate, is not found in either of those. 12 is not found in 7, and 12 is not found in the number 5. So just by a mere analysis of the subject, 12 is not implied. So this judgment relies on some sort of sense experience. You had to experience 7 oranges and 5 oranges together in order to come to the conclusion of the number 12. Therefore, this statement is analytic, but it is also synthetic. It is also based on experience. So how is this judgment possible? This is what Kant is going to explain. Kant claims that the form of universality and necessity that we find in mathematical judgments, they come exclusively from the mind. They are a priori. Kant claims that we have mental concepts in our mind of space and time. These do not come from experience. These mental concepts help us make sense of experience. Experience is confusing. These concepts of space and time order that sense data. These mental intuitions in our mind put a form onto the material provided from our sense experience. These intuitions of space and time are a priori, so they are necessary. We have these whether we are experiencing something or not. They are necessary. The material data that they give form to, that's not necessary. That is something that we experience. So when we make judgments concerning mathematics, this is what is happening. These mental concepts are, in a sense, organizing and giving form to this confused material data. So in the end, we form judgments that are synthetic and necessary. This is what Kant is known for. Instead of the material world being out there impressing itself on our mind, it is our mind that is imposing itself upon the material world. Kant also wants to know how the science of nature is possible, and the theme is similar. Kant claims that we have these universal categories in our mind, these universal laws of nature, and these categories allow us to scientifically investigate nature. The first thing that Kant does is he makes a logical table of judgments. This table of judgments shows all our possible experiences. It shows the full range of judgments that we make about physical things. And for each part of this table of judgments, there is a corresponding table of categories. This is the second table that Kant makes. It is a table of pure concepts of the understanding. This table of conceptual categories is needed in order to make all the judgments that you make that can be found in the first table. These categories are a priori. They are in the mind already. So they are necessary, and they impose themselves upon the data of sense experience. It is not the physical things in the world that are imposing themselves on human beings. It is our mind that is imposing itself on the physical world. This is the so-called Copernican revolution of Kant. Instead of what would be the common sense position that these physical things impose themselves on the mind and the eyes of human beings, instead of that, Kant is switching that around and saying it is categories in our mind that are being imposed on the physical world. Kant emphasizes the point that these two tables, they do not apply to things in themselves, but only to what he calls phenomena. Now, phenomena are what we actually experience. They are the appearance of things. The phenomena are the sense data. They are the material things that are the subject matter of the forms of the understanding, of the categories. The noumena are the things in themselves. They are unknown to us. We cannot have certain and real knowledge of things in themselves. So the physical objects in the world, the things that we experience, we only know the appearance of these things, the color, the texture, the size, the length, but we cannot know the things in themselves, the noumena. We only know the phenomena. So the underlying nature of the things that we experience in the world are hidden from us. In this way, Kant restricts the search for knowledge to the domain of possible experience as shown in the categories. As we have seen, these a priori forms, the categories that we have in our mind, they only apply to the material of sense data. And this material, this sense data, we don't really know it. We just know the phenomena. We don't know the things in themselves. Kant claims that those who do metaphysics often make the mistake of applying reason to things in themselves. For Aristotle, the study of metaphysics begins with primary substances. It begins with individually existing things in the world. For Aristotle, these are the first things that we encounter in the world. We encounter another human being. We encounter a tree. These are the first things that we know. He calls these things primary substances. For Aristotle, the study of metaphysics, or the study of a deeper reality, it begins with the physical things in the world that we already know. Kant does not accept this. This is why the hyperbolic doubt of René Descartes is very important to understand concerning modern philosophers like Kant. They don't believe that the individually existing things in the world are the first things that you know. And for Kant, we can see this in his notion of phenomena and noumena. We cannot know the noumena. We cannot know things in themselves. We can't really know the primary substance, the individually existing thing. We cannot know the nature of it. So giving an essential definition of some sort of substance or even a human being would be kind of impossible for Kant.